Welcome back, everybody, to the Fantastic Fall Festival. We're going to do an introduction to bring Leah Day on. Leah Day, again, it's been really fun to partner with her over this period of time and to see all the things that she's done. And again, we just feel very fortunate. It's been very fortunate for us to be able to know her and for her to be able to be willing to partner with us on so many things. In fact, I'll just kind of throw this. We have different templates and rulers that she's created. You can go to her website, and we'll be putting that up here on the screen for those of you who are participating so that you can see everything that she's doing. She has an immense amount of videos. I love talking about this. This year I was on the phone with her not too long ago, about a month ago, just asking her about her year. And as you don't know, you might have saw the stories about her basement flooding, and that was an experience that she had to go through, remodeled it. I would probably say that she's going to say it was worth it for her too. I don't know. It took a long time, but I know that she now probably has her dream basement with the shifts. She did a whole remodel to her basement, which was fun to see, and as she partly experienced that as well. Not an easy thing, but a good thing. And she's been very busy, and she has videos and videos and videos. And where I'm going with this is, I think she's done over 30 this year that she's going to continue to put out, that she already has and that she has scheduled for the rest of this year. So with that, we're super excited to bring Leah Day on, and we're going to go ahead with Leah Day, knowing her amazing background as someone moving from the domestic world to the mid-arm world to the professional long arm world, also moving into knowing and what that is from free motion quilting and having several books and fabrics that you can buy and experiences that you can have to fully automated systems. She's doing a really great job in order to do so. And right now, with part of what we're looking at for her, I want to look at part of the term. This is part of her basket weaving experience that she has right now, and this is going to be series 2. So if you're not familiar and you haven't watched the version 1 of this, we're going to encourage you to go ahead and watch. We have posted this last week, and then you can watch this again. This is the Autumn Quilt Along called the Basket Weave. This is part 2. It says, join Leah Day in a second part of her Autumn Quilt Along series to create beautiful autumn basket weave quilts entirely with the QCT5 beginnings, which is our low-end automation system. Follow along with one video per week as she guides us through loading the quilt, placing, quilting designs, and troubleshooting issues that may arise along the way. If you already built your new skills on your home sewing machine or long arm quilting machine, tune on in the next week with what we've got today for this new quilt along. So with that, we're going to go ahead and bring that on.
Hello, my quilting friends. My name is Leah Day, and welcome back to Grace Company's Fantastic Fall Festival. This is a short and sweet quilt along. We are doing basket weave with QCT, and this is our second video in the series, and we are ready to start quilting. So you'll want to download this helpful little guide. This is going to show you the placement of the designs in our fall basket weave quilt. And I'm going to be following along. My quilt is mounted this way on the frame, so I'm going to be starting with this design here in this corner, and that is the arcs border. So we're going to stitch out the design in rectangles. I'm going to show you how to stitch out in small spaces, as well as utilizing the full space in the frame to stitch verticals as well. If you have a bigger long arm, this is definitely going to be for you. Now you will need one other thing to follow along, and that is just a simple 12-inch ruler so you can measure the spaces on the quilt and get really accurate placement. So very first step is to start working with our software. So the first thing we're going to do is tap on the pantograph option, and then we're going to set our safe area. And yes, you do want to set your safe area to be the full length and width of your frame. However much space you have to quilt in, you want to have the maximum amount of space to play. So once you set your safe area, this is what your screen's going to look like, and it's going to come in the full width, whatever you set your safe area to be. That full width is going to be pretty big, but we don't actually want to plan our designs to be in that much space. We want it to be set by the space we are quilting. So down here on the quilt, I'm going to take my ruler, I'm going to place it over the space and measure it. I'm using my long arm just so that way you can see what I'm doing. And this is 11 inches wide and 4 inches tall. So what I'm going to do is go in here and I'm going to set that total width to 11. And this is why you're going to need that ruler, so that way you can check in on your spaces and know how big they are. Now the height is going to be a little funny. I'm going to set that to 3.5. And the reason being is I like a little bit of a margin on the height of my spaces, and I'll explain that a little bit more as we start stitching out our designs. Now I'm going to tap on Select Pattern, and this very first pattern is the arcs border. It's right there, and I'm going to tap Open. So there we go. That is one pattern placed in that space, and that looks pretty good. You know, I like to quilt though a little bit more densely. I'm quilting roughly on a 1/2 to 1/4 inch scale on this quilt. So I'm going to do 2. I just hit that plus button so that way I have 2 patterns now. And I really like that. I think that looks really pretty. If you want less quilting, of course, you can always dial that back down to just 1. So I'm going to set that to 2. I think that looks pretty. And here's what's important. We are going to hit place as single pattern over here. Because basically what we did, we used the Panto tool to take 2 continuous line designs, merge them together so that way it's thinking it's one design. And now we can take this and place it on our quilt. So this is what's important. I was telling you how I wanted that little bit of a margin here on my quilt. What I mean by that is I want a little bit of a gap between the design and the top edge and that bottom edge of that space. But I want the design to start and stop right on this narrow edge. I like the idea of the design looking like it's stitched across and then actually truly overlapped by that neck, basket weave. It's a basket weave quilt, so I want it to look like that design comes through and then is overlapped by that design there. So how I'm going to do this, how I'm going to set up my placement is I'm going to rotate over, just roll over, and I have the couching foot from the 9-piece attachment foot set here. And I have that set because it has a really tiny hole down in there where I can see exactly where that needle is going to drop. And I'm going to roll over so that that is lined up right on that line. So I am starting right on that edge. Now back here, I'm setting up so I'm not right on the edge in the corner. I'm actually a 1/4 inch down, and that's exactly where I want it. So here on the screen, I know that's the placement node that I want. I'm going to tap it. It's going to immediately pop the design over and start setting it up in this place. Now, you might be wondering, why am I going to bother with all 4 attachment nodes? I'm going to roll over, get into the right position. In this case here, it's right on this narrow edge, but a 1/4 inch roughly from that bottom edge of that rectangle. And the reason why I do all 4 attachment nodes is, fabric can get wiggly and it might not be 100% perfect. And this rectangle might have gotten distorted somehow. So I'm going to make sure that it is placed really nicely in this quilt by doing all 4 attachment nodes. So again, here, rolling back, making sure that that tiny hole is lined up right on that line. And I'm roughly like the back edge of this foot is roughly along this back edge. And I tap that last attachment node. Now, 2 things that are really important as you do this. Do not lean on your rails. Do not lean on your frame because as you can see, that moves. That has a little bit of give to it. And if you are leaning on that, then that means that your placement will be off whenever you step back away from the frame and the machine starts running. So sometimes I'll even grab a step stool whenever the design is far back on the frame, just so that way I'm not tempted to lean on that and I'm sure that I'm going to get that accurate placement. Now, if you're not quite as nitpicky as me and you don't really care if the design is absolutely in the perfect spot, you can use a different foot. You do not have to have the 9-piece attachment foot set. I would say you could definitely use the ruler foot and get just as accurate placement. And then if you wanted to do your outline quilting with ruler quilting, you could use the ditcher ruler to then stitch an outline around this shape, around this rectangle. I'm going to continue using QCT because I really want to do almost as much quilting as I can with the software. So I'm going to not only stitch the design, I'm also going to do some outline quilting around that rectangle. So in order to do this, we're going to use another tool. It's in the toolbox. So I'm going to tap on that. So here's the toolbox. I'm going to go down to the marking tool. You can see we already have a number 1 here. And this does require a little bit of guesstimation. You want to kind of guess and know where the design is going to begin, which looks like it's going to be in that lower left-hand corner, and it's going to end in that lower right-hand corner. Now, not all designs work this exact same way, so it does change depending on the design. But over here, it looks like it's going to end in that lower right-hand corner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start placing marks from that point down and around and do basically a straight line grid all around it. Now remember, I shrunk this. This is ever so slightly narrower, so that way the design doesn't fill the rectangle fully. I have that little bit of a margin to the top and bottom. So You might be wondering why I'm not just using the ditch tool right there and just stitching in the ditch. That's not going to do the job. I really need to use the marking tool instead. So what I'm going to do is roll over here, and I'm going to try and figure out exactly where I set that, kind of that lower left corner, a little bit off that edge, and I'm going to hit add. So that's where it's going to start. Okay, now I'm going to go down to the corner of the rectangle, just exactly on that corner, hit add again, roll all the way over to the other corner of the rectangle, and if anything, if I'm going to err on any side, it's going to be to the inside of the rectangle, to the inside of that light yellow rectangle, rather than to the outside in the red background, where I think that would be more noticeable if it was stitched off. And I'll be honest, this is not always perfect. You know, sometimes the stitching is off ever so slightly, but one thing I've been really working on is not being quite such a perfectionist and allowing the machine to do more work for me. And this is so much faster. Okay, so there we go. And then come back around and try and end exactly where it stopped. So there we go. So that is how I would use the marking tool to mark that outline. As you can see, if I zoom in, let's see, if I can zoom in here, you can really see how that outline is about 1/4 inch from the top and bottom, but running right along the sides of the design. So this is exactly what I want to stitch in this rectangle. So over here, I'm going to make sure that I have the pattern selected and also marking selected. So I'm sure I'm going to be stitching out both of those things, and then I'm going to hit quilt. So I hit quilt, make sure I got everything out of the way, and also make sure that your needle is in the up position at this point. It's going to ask you, of course, but it's always good to double check before you get to this screen. Now, one quick thing I forgot to check in on is settings, and this is really important. So I have my machine set to slow. It's just how I like to run it. I like it to run fairly slow just so it has the best stitch quality. I do a tie-off count of 2, and I do a micro stitch. This is just personal preference. And I have this set to do an automatic bobbin pull, pause at trim lines, and to do 15 stitches per inch. So those are all of the settings that I use with QCT5. And now I'm going to hit pull bobbin. What this is going to do, the machine's going to turn on. It's going to first ask you if your needle is up. Like I said, I'm going to say do not show that again, because I know if I am using QCT and kind of running with it, my needle is pretty much always going to end up in the up position. So it's rolled over, it's gotten to the start point, it's needle down, needle up, and now it's going to rotate over. Now this is where you can check yourself and check your placement. If you've just needled down and needle back up, and this is way off and not on the edge of that rectangle, well, you can just hit the back button, go back in, reset your placement nodes, and then get started again, because you know that the design is not quite fitting in the space properly. But this looks perfect. You see how that bobbin thread is pulled up exactly on that line. I'm so happy with that. Okay, now I'm going to hit sew, and the entire design is going to stitch out. It's going to stitch through the entire rectangle, and then it's going to stop whenever it gets to that marking set. It's going to need to be advanced, and you'll have to hit a button. You'll have to hit move to next. So I'm going to let this stitch out, and then we'll meet up whenever that happens. So here we go. The design has fully stitched out, and now your screen will change to this. It will say move to next. So you just tap move to next. If you were good on your placement, then it should have just been a little bit of a blip, a little bit of a move. As you can see, the machine hardly moved at all. And now it's ready to do that marking, that outline quilting. So I'm just going to hit sew. I do not need to break thread because that start and end point was pretty much dead on top of itself. So just keep that in mind. Your goal is always to start that marking exactly where the design ends, so that way it continues seamlessly. Okay, so the design stitched, the marking stitched, we've got it all done, and I'm going to click Finished, back to pattern placement. And as you can see here, the screen is going to flick back, and it's going to be regulated precise, and then whatever your stitch length is. In this case, it's 15 stitches per inch for me. Whenever it flips back and it no longer says quilt motion, that means that you have control over your handlebars again, meaning the buttons will work again. So what I'm going to do is pull my bobbin thread up to the surface so that way I can tie off and bury those thread tails securely. So the first thing I do is I push the long arm away. This spools out the bobbin thread so that way I'm sure I have a nice long thread tail there. I pull the machine back and I put it right on top of where I ended that stitching line. So I'll bring that right to that spot wherever my stitching ended, needle down, needle back up, tug on that, and that's going to bring up a loop. That loop is my bobbin thread. So I can clip that, pull the machine away, and then I'm left with the 2 thread tails from that ending stitching. It's a little bit confusing, takes a little bit of practice to get the hang of that, but I promise it's a great habit to get into. You can tie off and bury these thread tails so your quilting doesn't come out, doesn't unravel. Okay, so we have our design set up here. So what we can do is just take this design and move to the next rectangle. And this is exactly how you're going to stitch all of the rectangles all the way down the row of your quilt. So if I was doing that, I'm going to go back to placement. I'm going to go back and reset this. Again, foot in the same position, right along that narrower side of the rectangle, 1/4 inch from the top, and I'm going to hit that first placement node. But as you can see, that goes crazy here on the screen. It twists the design around, does all kinds of weird stuff. So just keep that in mind. That's going to be normal because it was already placed over here and now I'm shifting it to another area of the quilt. So I'm going to move the long arm, shift it again. Now it's kind of flipped the design around. Don't worry. Just remember which placement nodes you've touched, you've moved, and don't get confused. I'm going to shift this over, tap that top one, shift it again, tap that bottom one. But here's the thing. If we take a look at the marking is always going to retain the placement of where it was on the quilt. So we actually need to go into that marking tool and we need to click the button that says Remove All. Because every time you move the design, you set that rectangle somewhere else, you're going to need to remove all of the marking of the one before and reset that marking in its new location. So keep that in mind. That's something you're going to have to do every time you stitch a rectangle on this quilt is reset your marking. It doesn't take that much time. It is a time saver, I think, overall, and I'll show you that because I'm going to now stitch this design in this rectangle, and then I'll grab my ditcher ruler and I'll show you the alternative. So if you want absolute precision and perfection when it comes to your outline quilting, definitely use the ditcher ruler and the ruler foot on your long arm. So this has stitched out. I'm going to tap Finished, back to pattern placement, and as you can see, the screen has once again bounced back to regulated precise. I'm going to go into my menu and I'm going to change this to Cruise, just because I find that a little bit easier to work with. Now I'm going to hold onto my needle down button until the needle drops, so it's always going to end in the down position. And I do this all just simply to make sure that it's going to be really easy for me to do this ruler quilting. So I'll line up and try and get right on the outline. I'm going to grab the ditcher ruler, and this ruler has really nice evenly spaced etched lines, 1/4 inch away. I like to use this edge just because I can really easily see those lines and make sure I'm lined up nicely. And of course, this would be a lot more accurate and easy to use if I was using the ruler foot. That would give me 1/4 inch spacing. But I find that even with this couching foot, I can eyeball it and adjust as I go. And as you can see, that stitching is landing exactly on that outline. I like it. And this just takes a little bit more time. I do click the machine on and off as I go. I always put the ruler in my non-dominant hand. In this case, it's my right hand. And then I operate the machine with my left hand, my dominant hand. So that's always something to do. I just find that I have more control this way, steering the machine. And then of course, you know, if I did it the other way, then my buttons would be reversed, right? So this is the way that works best for me. So now I'm going to rotate the ruler and go straight up, right along that outline. If it's off a little bit, just nudge the ruler over. There we go. If I was using a ruler foot, then I would be able to line up that etched line, or this edge line actually, with that line marked on the panel. So keep that in mind too. I'm kind of lazy at to be honest. Once I get a foot on the long arm, I don't tend to change it. I get kind of stuck in my ways, and I've been playing with this couching foot quite a lot lately, just to get that accurate placement. So, you know, once I kind of stick something on the frame, on the long arm, I don't usually swap it out very often. But, you know, you could be changing your foot with, you know, all the time. You know, you don't have to leave it on there if you don't want to. Okay, so stitch over, get to that point, and then now straight down. So that is the alternative. If you don't want to use the marking tool, if you find that to be just not as accurate as you would like, you can also use ruler quilting instead. Okay, so let's talk real quick about the background. It is entirely up to you if you want to quilt these spaces or not. I decided to quilt my spaces with a design called sharp stippling. Basically, you just stitch a wiggly line and then you come to sharp points. And this is the only design in the quilt that I stitched freehand, meaning I did not use QCT. I just stitched this myself, shifting the machine around, come to a sharp point, wiggle down, wiggle through that area, and I'm always kind of thinking about keeping this on the same scale, the lines of quilting roughly the same distance apart as what I've stitched with QCT. So if this seems, you know, like a little challenging to you, maybe don't have the freehand quilting skills, then understand that you can also do outline quilting with the marking tool. You could do an X through here using the marking tool. You could do some straight lines. There's lots of different options. Anything that you want to put in the space, actually. You could even place one of the smaller, simpler designs in this area, and that would be fine too. I want you to understand that you can absolutely leave the red background fabric in this quilt open so long as your batting allows it. So this is a pack of Quilter's Dream poly batting, and somewhere on the package it's going to tell you how much quilting your quilt will need. And in this case it says stitches up to 10 inches apart. So if you were to use this batting in this quilt, you could leave basically 9 inches open with no quilting in it at all and be able to get away with it. The only reason why you would need a quilt denser is because it's the design and you want to add more pretty stitches and decorative design to it, right? Understand that the quilting stitches hold your quilt together. The point and purpose of it is to stop the batting from shifting. So if you want to do less quilting, just need to make sure that your batting allows it. I know that my other favorite batting, which is Hobbs Heirloom Wool, has stitching, I think, 3 inches apart. And this is a 3-inch square, so if I use that batting in this quilt, I wouldn't be able to leave those squares open and empty. I'd have to do some quilting in them. Otherwise, again, the batting could shift and get all lumpy whenever I go and quilt my quilt. Sorry, whenever I go and wash my quilt. So understand that that's the purpose of our quilting stitches. And if you don't like quite as much stitching as I'm doing in this quilt, you want to do a little bit less, that's perfectly fine. So now we know how to stitch designs that are long and horizontal. Let's go all the way back. I'm going to hit X and I'm going to come back to this screen where we originally started working with our pantograph. So I want to talk about placing a design into a space that looks like this. This is 4 inches tall by 3 inches wide. We're going to set this up to stitch the full 3 inches wide, but again, I'm going to shrink that height down to 3.5 inches tall. So here we go. We're going to change that total width here to 3 inches. I'm making sure that my pattern height has stayed the same, 3.5, 3.5, that looks good. And let's go in and grab our next pattern, and that's going to be this curly Q. So I'm going to tap on that, click open, and what I need to do over here is reduce the number of patterns just to 1. And as you can see, my pattern height got a little funny here, so I need to make sure to check that. That needs to be 3.5, and that other pattern height. So you have a total height and then you have a pattern height. A little confusing, but basically that needs to be the same. 3, 3, sorry, tap that. That needs to be 3 width, 3 width, 3.5, 3.5. And as you can see, this design is a little bit skinny and a little bit tall. I think this looks good. It's ever so slightly distorted, but I think it looks good because it's going to be consistent all the way across the quilt, which means that whenever I put multiple of these designs together to do my wider spaces, they're all going to basically look consistent. They're all going to look about the same. All right, so we're going to do that same placement again, lining up that needle so that it's lined up with that edge of the rectangle. Tap on my first placement node, roll that machine down, get it lined up again, tap that next placement node. And if your machine gives you a little warning, you know, something like, oh, it's out of the safe area or something, that just might mean that you're ready to advance your quilt. So don't worry about that. Just shift your quilt if you need to. This is what I love about the 21. You have so much space to play in before you have to do any advances. So there we go. Again, remember, we're 1/4 inch from the top and bottom, but right on that narrow side. So that is that small design placed. Again, if I wanted to do some markings around it, I could, and then hit quilt. So I pulled my bobbin, got the machine ready to go, and it's going to stitch this out. So understand that I have intentionally designed my designs to be a little bit on the denser side, and in some cases they end up looking ever so slightly squished. Like the curly Q looks a little bit squished so that the shapes are a little bit longer than they are wide. But whenever I put 3 of them together to fit into my 10-inch by 4-inch rectangle, it ends up looking pretty much the same. So I aim for consistency. So if you have one shape and it looks one way, and then when you put multiple of them together, it looks roughly the same, I think that looks good. But again, all you have to do if you want a little less quilting is just do one less design into that space, and that'll work fine too. Okay, so that finished. Back to pattern placement. Let me go over that bobbin pull one more time just so that you know how to do it. I pull my machine over so that way that spools out my thread. And if your machine feels kind of stuck, what you could do is you can come over here between your take-up bar and that last pigtail guide and tug on it a little bit. And that will give you a little bit of slack, right? And so you pull it over, that spools out your bobbin thread too. Then you bring it back to where you ended your line of quilting, and then you know that your buttons are working again because your monitor says regulated precise, so your buttons are going to be working again. Make sure that you're right on that spot, needle down, needle up, and then pull the machine away, and so that top thread is going to pull up a loop. That loop is your bobbin thread, so you want to cut both thread tails, and then you can tie off and bury your thread tails. So every time that I have one of those little narrow spaces, I'm going to have one on one end of the quilt and on the other. So at this point, I would go on ahead and have this basically created, have the design sized the right way. I go down to the other end of the quilt, place it, stitch it, so it's already done. But real quick, let's go over how do I make this for our wider spaces for one of these nice long 10-inch wide by 4 inches tall spaces. So I'm going to go back to this screen where I set up my pantographs. I'm going to change that total width to 10. And you can see it just stretched that pattern out really wide. And I'm just going to tap this twice. And you can see it creates 3 of them together and has that same, ever so slightly taller spiral. And that's exactly what I want. And always remember, we're going to be placing this as a single pattern. That's what we always tap for this. So that is how I would go from a single shape to a long, narrow shape. Now let's talk about something else. This is going to be something that I think is really important whenever you are quilting on a bigger long arm. So on this quilt, of course, we have these horizontal and vertical bands. When you have it on your frame, you can quilt these horizontal sections really easily. But what about these verticals? If you're quilting on a Unique 15 or on a whole machine, how you're going to quilt the verticals is you're going to take the quilt, you're going to do all of your horizontals first, you're going to stitch through all of those, then you're going to take your quilt, take it off the frame, rotate it, and then all of the vertical spaces will become horizontals. So then you can stitch them easily. If you have a Unique 19 or a Unique 21, you have enough space within the arm of the machine to be able to quilt your verticals too. So here's how you're going to do that. First, I'm going to go on ahead and set up my pantograph, and I'm going to go on ahead and quilt it into this space. So here is the space that I am going to stitch my next design. This is pattern C that is going to go into this tall, skinny rectangle. This is 9 inches tall by 4 inches wide. But here's the thing that's might be a little bit confusing, and that is that we're going to continue to use the software as if we're stitching a horizontal. And in the next screen, that's where I will rotate it in order to fit into this tall, skinny space. So I'm going to go in and select my pattern, and we are going to put pattern C in this space. And I'm going to dial this down to just 2 because I think that's going to look the best. It's not going to be too squished together. And here you can see my total height, 3.5. My total width is 9. So just remember, it's going to look like you're stitching a horizontal. It's okay. As soon as you hit that place a single pattern, you can get to this screen and you see over here, we've got the ability to rotate it. So I'm going to tap on the 45, 45, and now my design is vertical, but it's all squished together. So what do I do now? All right, so I'm going to roll this over and I'm going to set my placement marks. So again, lining up so that the needle is lined up with that skinny edge of the rectangle right on that outline, making sure that the foot is lined up over here so that it is right on about 1/4 inch actually from that side. So that looks good. I'm going to tap on that placement node. Now, if you want it to immediately stop being so squished together, then you'll want to go onto the diagonal, meaning the direct diagonal from that one. Again, place it so that the needle is lined up on that edge, 1/4 inch from that longer edge. Tap that, and it gets even weirder. It really distorts. It's kind of funny how these designs can look really, really bad before they start looking better. There we go. That's better. Just run through all of those placement nodes. And if you find my placement confusing, how I'm leaving that little bit of a margin between, basically the long sides of the design and the rectangle, don't worry about that. Just place it in the corners if that makes more sense to you. That's perfectly fine. All right, so my design now looks right. It's tall and skinny. It's placed on the quilt properly. I know it's going to stitch out. And if I wanted to, I know that this would begin stitching kind of in the middle and end stitching kind of in the middle on the bottom. I could place my marks and also do my outline quilting too. So in order to stitch that, I just hit quilt, and now it will stitch out that design vertically. And the only limitation, like I said, is just making sure that your long arm is big enough to fit the design. You need that full 9 inches, plus enough space for your foot, plus enough space for the rails. You need a good bit of space in order to quilt that. I don't think that the Qnique 15 has enough space in the harp plus everything else in order to be able to quilt a full 9 or 10 inch design. So this looks good. I pull my bobbin and now I hit sew. So that is how I place my designs and stitch them in the basket weave quilt using QCT5 beginnings. Understand that those verticals are very, very easy to stitch if you have a smaller long arm. All you need to do is take your quilt off the frame, rotate it, and then all of those verticals will become horizontals, and you can stitch them the same way as I showed at the very beginning of this video. So this is going to be one of those things you want to take your time on. Follow along with this chart very carefully to place and stitch your designs. And whether you use the marking tool to do your outline quilting, you don't do any outline quilting at all, or you use a ditcher ruler and a ruler foot, it's going to come out great. It's a really fun quilt to quilt, and it gives you lots of stitching time on QCT5, a lot of practice and bang for your buck. So I hope that you'll follow along, stitching out all of these cute designs, and come back for the next video in our Fall Fantastic Quilt Along as we stitch out our borders, which is the last step of this quilt along. So that's it for this video. My name is Leah Day, and until next time, let's go quilt.
Thank you so much, Leah. We appreciate all that. It's been fun having everybody join us and having her do part of our quilting process and walk us through part of that and utilizing part of our QCT beginnings. In fact, let me go ahead and find that is, as Mark and Carla mentioned, we'll bring Mark and Carla in here as well. Hello, Mark and Carla. There we go. Carla's getting her mic on.
Sorry.
That's good. We're going to go ahead and we'll put me up there in front of everybody a little bit. But with that, I'm going to just quickly walk through the promotional piece so that everybody can kind of see what this is. And I'm not going to spend much time on this at all, but I thought maybe I'll go ahead and just quickly scroll down to the bottom. If anybody currently owns one of our quilting machine systems, the 15, the 19, the 21, the 21 Pro, or if you have a domestic machine that we can put stitch regulation on it, give us a call and we can tell you a little bit more about the compatibility, but it's currently on sale. So the system that Leah was sharing, and again, thank you, Leah, for all your efforts and your time. It's been wonderful having you with and having you join us as part of that process. So again, what I wanted to show everybody here is that they're on sale. This might look a little bit steep if you're not familiar with the automation and normal pricing in the industry. It averagely people would say it's around $10,000. If you say, oh, if you want to go add a computer to your system, how much is it? Outside of that, both the beginning and the pro version of QCT5 work on the Q-Zone hoop frame, so the zoning frame, and it has the smarts that it will actually take and move your quilt and help index the different places for you to move your quilt so that you can do so correctly. So it's a great thing to do it. And maybe Carla, why don't you just share with us a little bit about your experience? I know you've had a chance to do several different quilts on the Q-Zone hoop frame with the automation as well.
And it was so much fun. I didn't realize how, I dare say it's a little bit more interactive than on the rolling frames, and so it just keeps you busy and keeps you engaged, and that's what's so much fun about the automation. If you think you love free motion quilting, yeah, this is another aspect of the quilting that you can add, and for not a large amount of money as well. So check it out, see the differences, and you can start out with the beginnings, and like Nathan said, it's very intuitive. So it will direct you on where you need to roll it. It will move the machine. Now the beginnings, you can just quilt 2 rows at a time and then you have to reset it. But with the Pro, it's going to let you lay out your whole quilt and quilt it from edge to edge or quilt a block at a time. So it's fun, and it's, you know, you can spend a lot of time like shopping for fabrics, shopping for designs. That's another thing that I like to do, is just sit on the websites and see what design, oh, it's going to go great with this quilt. And so that's a lot of fun as well. So check it out.
I love that. So now we're shopping, I guess, for 3 things. We're shopping for fabrics that we love. We're shopping for threads to finish our quilting, and now we're also shopping for patterns, right? So, oh, you might even shop for patterns at the beginning. So, and shoes. Add shoes to the list, and we'll shop for shoes. I'm with Carla. I am like that. My wife will tell me I need to stop buying. It's not that I buy them all the time, but they last me forever, because if you wear 1 pair, right? Everybody, we know this. If you want to comment, yeah, we know if you have, you know, several pairs of shoes and you just wear 1 a month, they can last forever. But pretty soon, after a couple of years, you're like, I think I need a different pair of shoes because it doesn't match this process. So yeah, I'm with you on that one. I love the shoe side. So with that, Mark, I think Mark, you have like 10 pairs, or you have like 2 pairs. Like what's your gig over there in shoes?
2.
Oh, Mark, you're missing out, dude. You need to go out and buy some new shoes. Heather, he needs new shoes.
Wonderful. So good one on that one. That's wonderful. So with that, I thought I kind of talked about some of the prices and the discounts that we have, which has been really good. Maybe really quick with what we've got going on, Carla, as a recap from earlier on today, we talked about the hoop frame. Coming back just really quickly from the hoop frame, again, maybe really quick, Leah Day, I'm just looking at some comments again. Thanks for being on with us, Leah. Thanks for helping answer a lot of those questions. It's been fun. If you haven't had a chance, go visit her site, leahday.com, and she has several things going on there with her site, several things that she does from an educational standpoint. But Carl, I wanted to go back because I was going to bring up the hoop frame. We gave that away today. Yes. And I know that's one of our most popular products we currently have. Share with me a little bit on why that's been so popular.
It's an easy frame. I mean, if you think it's difficult to set up, oh my gosh, you're wrong. Of all the frames we have ever made, and we have made a heck of a lot of frames, this is absolutely one of the easiest frames to put together. I mean, Mark can put it together with his eyes closed. I need to have my eyes open, but it just takes very few screws to set it up, and you can start quilting just within minutes of it being set up. You just put your machine on it and you're ready to go. And it makes easy work of quilting using your domestic machine. You just place your foot pedal down below. You can sit or you can stand. You can adjust the height so it's comfortable to quilt with. So yeah, check it out online. It gives you the dimensions. It's a small frame. It doesn't limit you to the size quilt you can quilt. I better take a breath and tell you some more about it. Like I showed you last week of how easy it was to add a laser and other accessories to quilt with. Yeah, you can add a laser, you can add ruler bases. Now, you can get ruler bases with your domestic machines as well. If you go to Westedly Rulers, you can add ruler bases to them. And sometimes the machines have such a wide base that you can actually set a small ruler on it and do some templates. Also, it doesn't take up as much room as you think. And you can start with your domestic machine, but you can upgrade to the 15R, which is a great transition, and then move to a 19. So you can elevate your quilting with a newer machine that has built-in stitch regulation, and the buttons are easy, the handles are adjustable, so check them out. Now, Mark, it's your turn.
You're exactly right. With where you can start and that growth opportunity, you're not just stuck with what you feel like something you can't progress with, or
Right.
the throw space is smaller and you don't want to go any further. So we went over a lot of the stuff, and that was perfect what you said with exactly on our machines. And so it's great from the smaller machine to the larger machine. And talking about the frames, they are something that are super easy to put together. So
Oh God,
all
so
of our
easy.
product, yeah. And like Carla said, I can do mine with my eyes closed. It take me a little longer. No, I can't.
Everything we make is easy to put on and take off. Don't let your husbands do it. You do it. You don't care what age you are. Yeah. Make sure that you are getting in there and learning with them, because it helps you become a better quilter. And the knowledge of putting those frames together and machines on and learning how they work and function is very important.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Do we have any maybe some good questions or thoughts, even though we weren't talking too much on a lot of this
I went
stuff
on
here?
a little bit too much, so.
No, it's good. That's good. We'll bring Nathan.
Ruler base.
Ruler
Carol
base.
K says ruler base, question mark. Yes, you can add the ruler bases to any of our machines. And like I said, contact Westedly Rulers, and you can add ruler bases to several of the domestic machines that are out there as well.
Yeah, with this, I thought this is an interesting question. I don't think that I would have necessarily the best answer for this one outside of Westedly Lake Rulers. I know that they do custom bases around machines all the time, and I do know that they're making them for some of our frames with machines. So I would kind of just do a shout out to go and visit with them.
And they have measurements too. So.
And but with that would be for your domestic machine. If you're using one of our machines, then there are ruler bases for the 15s, the 19s, and the 21 and 21 Pro that you can get with that. This is another interesting question. I thought maybe you could read the question out loud, and then Mark, share with us what's the story on this with the frames.
So Linda says, does it have to be leveled?
Are you going to level with us, Mark?
I'm going to level with you, Linda. Yes, it needs to be leveled.
Honesty is a true virtue. Okay.
That's right. I'm going to level with you. Yeah, it needs to be leveled. If you don't, you're going to find your machine, it's going to move on you.
Yeah.
And also could do some vibrations as well. If it's not leveled, which means one of the or a couple of the leveling feet are not touching the ground at some point, and that can cause for more vibration. Not only that, but your machine could also go backwards or forwards when you don't want it to. So if you level your frame out, it will keep your vibrations down, and it'll keep your machines in place.
Yeah, you see these machines are not moving on us. That means that we leveled the frames so that they're staying in the same place, and it's not going to tip and roll. You don't have to walk and sew with it as it's going down.
Here's something else I thought I'd bring up really quick with everybody. This is a question that's being asked, is some of the ads are upgrading to a Continuum for 1,000. What this question is if you buy the the 15 machine, so I have this on the screen. If you're going to be buying any one of the 15s, the M, the R, or the 15 Pro, you're getting the free Q-Zone hoop frame, which is our standard Q-Zone hoop frame, or we're giving you the Queen frame. That is a free piece. If you upgrade to the Continuum from this combo, so with the 15, you will pay $1,250 for the additional cost in order to go to the bigger professional Continuum. That is for any size Continuum, 8, 10, or 12 foot frame. It doesn't matter. So you'd pay that $1,250. Let me move up here to our 19. This 19 machine, it's coming with a free frame. However, it's not just the Q-Zone hoop frame. This one is coming with the Q-Zone Hoop Frame Pro. So this is coming with a professional Q-Zone hoop frame, which also comes with a welded table, table inserts. It has leader cloths as part of that package as a whole. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, and well, the dual track system is part of that welded table system. So it comes with an upgraded track system. Again, this one is only $1,000 because in essence, this one's coming with a more premium frame already. Again, so if you're buying the 19, it's only $1,000 to convert this machine with the free frame combo to get the Continuum with this frame. So I just thought I would quickly clarify that as part of the questions with what that was out there as well. We can go ahead and move back to some of the other questions that we might have here on the side that I can bring up here.
Yeah, questions, comments. Lexi, I see where Lexi for Beth, sorry, says I love it because it fits. It wasn't that easy for me to set up though. LOL. So
I think she's talking about the automation with the system, because I know this is just potentially right after Leah Day and her stuff regarding QCT. So I think that does take a little bit longer. If you're going to do and build the frame, then you add your machine, then you add automation. There's a few different steps there, so it did take a little bit of time. Maybe answer this question on QCT, Mark.
So Beth, as you see on the screen, it will work with the Queen frame. And if we're talking about automation, it will work with any of our Grace frames. The automation, when it comes down to it, is more compatible with the machine that you're looking at. But as far as a Grace frame, yes, it would fit on the Q-Zone Queen, the Continuum Queen, the Q-Zone Hoop. So all of our current Grace frames plus our previous frames, it will. Great question, Beth.
But call and ask our wonderful account executives, because they should know the answers to those questions. They get asked it a lot. And call us and ask.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Again, with that, let me go ahead and put that up for everybody to see. Again, if you want to, you're more than welcome to, again, call in at our I-800, but you could there. So if you have product questions, you want to know, there's also compatibility lists, you can do so. The other thing that you can do as well is just give us a call at our 800 number. That's 1-800-264-0644 for questions. Again, I like to talk about this. Our account executives are what we really try to do, and what we strive to do with those people who call is there's usually a lot of questions, and what we're trying to understand is what you're looking to accomplish. And our goal is to help partner you as you have these questions and these challenges, and we're looking at what we might do in order to help you find a success in completing your quilt. What tools would kind of put you in the right position? And then we look at that. What does that mean on a budget? What does that mean on a space? What does that mean on a skill set? And so then we can help build you something that will work best. Again, if we were to do a shout out for all of our dealers, last time we did here, and thank you everybody for joining us as we did this. We had several of you contact our local dealers. We would encourage you to do so. On the Grace Frames website up top, there's just an easy dealer locator. And again, if you don't find one in your local area, feel free, you can phone one of the closest ones or give us a call. We'd be more glad to help answer any questions for you on that.